I had an idea, and I recognized this could be extremely important. I worked all night working out the consequences of this idea, and it turned out that it was an extremely important idea in chemistry about the nature of the chemical bond. But even though I was very excited there, how long ago was that? 61 years ago, I'm more excited now. And the reason is that I believe, and Dr. Matthias Rath, my associate, believes that we have the possibility now of eliminating cardiovascular disease as a cause of death. Well, of course, we may be wrong in thinking that, but the arguments that we use are so logical that I think perhaps we're exaggerating a bit in having this opinion, but I think there's this possibility of eliminating heart disease and strokes and related diseases that involve the cardiovascular system. They perhaps won't be eliminated, but we can help to control them if progress continues to be made. I was asked recently who the most influential teacher was that I had, a person who's writing a book. I thought I've had a number of very good teachers, but there's one that I feel I owe the greatest debt to. His name was Roscoe Gilkey Dickinson. He was the first man to take a PhD degree from the California Institute of Technology, 1920. I came there in 1922. He was in charge of me when I was starting my work as a graduate student, and he taught me the techniques, the experimental techniques during the first 3 months, and taught me something else too. This was a fine field of investigation, determining the structure of crystals by X-ray diffraction, but it was especially good for me in that it involved a whole series of logical arguments. I learned how to interpret experimental results, observations, in a logical, rational way. One thing he taught me was this: when you are interpreting some observations or data, you should be rational, logical in the interpretation. But you should also say to yourself, am I making an assumption? Does my interpretation depend upon some assumption that I'm making that may not be correct? So that was in the fall of 1922. Let me see, that's just 70 years ago. Is that right? Ever since then, I have, while I was doing my scientific work and also medical work, medical research, I have kept this in mind all of the time. Be logical, rational in your reasoning, and also think carefully, trying to decide whether or not you might be going forward on an incorrect assumption of some sort. Well, now, this work on heart disease that I shall talk about has involved a whole sequence of logical arguments. It has involved some experimental discoveries too, but it's in large part the interpretation of experimental knowledge and clinical knowledge, biochemical knowledge that has led to the progress that we have made. I've known Dr. Rath for more than a decade. I first got acquainted with him when he was a medical student, and I can remember that I said that he ought to work harder, get his MD degree, and he says also that after he got his MD degree and became interested in cardiology, that I had encouraged him to do research. So, before he came to our institute in Palo Alto, the Linus Pauling Institute of Science and Medicine, he made what I think is probably the most important discovery in heart disease, perhaps even in medicine, that has been made during the last quarter of this century. Everybody knows that cholesterol is laid down in the arteries near the heart and other arteries carrying blood to the brain, and that these plaques involve cholesterol in the form of LDL, low-density lipoprotein. You try to lower your cholesterol in various ways, some of which are uncomfortable, hard to follow, like swallowing 25 grams of some resin that binds with the bile acids, 25 grams every day, 6 spoonfuls of this stuff. Not very effective. Emil Ginter in Czechoslovakia pointed out that taking a gram or two of vitamin C lowers the cholesterol for people with high cholesterol more effectively than anything else. But, and it's easy to take extra vitamin C. That's just one of the ways in which vitamin C impinges on cardiovascular disease. There are many other ways. Vitamin C is different from the other vitamins. Most of the vitamins serve as coenzymes in enzyme systems. They're not used up while they are working, catalyzing biochemical reactions. Vitamin C gets used up when it reacts, when it functions. One way in which vitamin C functions is to hold the body together. The principal structural macromolecule in human beings and other animals is a protein, collagen. You can't make collagen without using up vitamin C. You synthesize in your bodies a molecule called procollagen. To change it into collagen, you have to introduce hydroxyl groups. There are many chemical reactions in the body that involve hydroxylation, and vitamin C is required. Well, they haven't all been studied, but we know many of them for which vitamin C is required, and it is used up when they occur. So if you take a large amount of vitamin C, you synthesize a large amount of collagen. This has been known for 60 years, I suppose. It's been known that wound healing is speeded up if the injured person or the surgical patient is given large doses of vitamin C. But if you want to have strong bones and tough skin and good teeth and gums and so on, and strong arteries, then you have to take lots of vitamin C. For about 25 years, I've been trying to determine what is the optimum amount to take of vitamin C and other vitamins, the amount that puts a person in the best of health. I know that the RDA is 60 milligrams a day for vitamin C, and that the Food and Nutrition Board of the National Academy of Sciences says that that is enough to keep almost every person in ordinary good health from dying of scurvy. I agree. It is. It's enough to keep every person, nearly every person, from dying of scurvy. But I ask another question. Since vitamin C has no toxicity, you can take a quarter of a pound without any harm to yourself, or even take a quarter of a pound day after day, unless it's too effective as a laxative for you. And that's not very serious. It may even be beneficial, I think, to take the amount that serves as a laxative. Well, it has no known toxicity. No one's ever died from an overdose of vitamin C. So, I searched the medical literature 25 years ago to find out the answer to this other question. What is the amount that I should take to be in the best of health? I couldn't find anything. So I began trying to develop arguments about the amount that people ought to take. I had a friend, died recently, who named Irwin Stone, Dr. Irwin Stone, a biochemist, who said, everybody on earth is suffering from a genetic disease called hypoascorbemia, not enough ascorbic acid, vitamin C in the bloodstream. And that the Food and Nutrition Board, in saying that 60 milligrams of vitamin C will keep every person in ordinary good health from dying of scurvy, should say every person in ordinary poor health. There are only a few people who are in good health, and they, I say, should be taking between 2 grams and perhaps 18 grams or even more of vitamin C per day in order to be in much better health than if they rely on the recommended amount of 60 milligrams per day, which you can get without too much trouble in your food. Half the people, a big survey showed that half the people in the United States, well, this is 15 years ago now, half the people were getting less than 50 milligrams a day, and the other half somewhat more. And of course, there was a recent paper published a month or 6 weeks ago. There was an article about it in the Chronicle and in almost every other newspaper, showing that people who take a little extra vitamin C, 600 milligrams a day, vitamin supplement, have only, in the case of men, they have 42% fewer heart attacks, fewer deaths from heart disease. Women, not quite so much, 25% fewer. Well, of course, 600 milligrams is only 10 times RDA. If you take 6,000 milligrams, nobody knows yet, because there haven't been studies done, how much the incidence of deaths from heart disease would be decreased, and in fact, they reported decreased deaths from other causes too, all causes. How much the death rate would be decreased if people took 6,000 milligrams a day. So my recommendation is 2 grams to 6,000, to 18 grams per day. Now, the paper that we just published is based upon some facts that we know and have discovered. First, there was a very important discovery made 3 or 4 years ago by Dr. Rath, that it is a protein called lipoprotein A that is laid down in atherosclerotic plaques, not LDL. Well, lipoprotein A it's usually said to be one of the low-density lipoproteins, and the amount is just reported along with LDL. It is present in rather small amounts, but variable from person to person. Something like 10% as much on average as LDL. It is a larger lipoprotein, a larger globule containing more cholesterol than LDL. In fact, it is made from an LDL particle by attaching another chunk of protein to the apoprotein of LDL. And that makes, since the protein is in the skin of the particle, that increases its area and hence its volume, and it contains more cholesterol. Vitamin C, we discovered that, and published this paper 2 years ago, deficiency in vitamin C is responsible for people manufacturing large amounts of lipoprotein A. That is an effort by the body. The process of evolution began operating effectively when human beings lost the ability to make their own vitamin C, which most animals can do. Human beings lost this ability, the predecessor of human beings, and immediately there was pressure, evolutionary pressure, to take care of the fact that the animals, our predecessors, were not getting enough vitamin C to strengthen the blood vessels. So a mutation occurred leading to the production of a lot of lipoprotein A, apoprotein A, that's the important part, lipoprotein A. And this lipoprotein A was laid down on the surface of the blood vessels, the walls of the blood vessels, to make them stronger. They were weak because people were relying on their vegetables and fruits that they were eating for their vitamin C, and they weren't getting very much. Perhaps just the 60 milligrams a day that's recommended to people now. And accordingly, their blood vessels were weak because of not having enough vitamin C. And the lipoprotein A helped to strengthen the blood vessels. Now, it's interesting that we haven't yet learned how to control the amount of lipoprotein A that people have in their bloodstream. There's a 1,000-fold range from less than a milligram per deciliter to a couple of 100 milligrams per deciliter. People who have between 10 and 20 milligrams per deciliter in their bloodstream are quite well protected against heart disease. If they have a smaller amount, their blood vessels are weak and some of them develop heart disease. If they have a larger amount than 20 milligrams per day, they are at high risk for heart disease because with this larger amount, they lay down too much of the lipoprotein, and that means laying down the plaques that occlude the lumens of the blood vessels, interfere with the flow of blood, produce atherosclerosis, and in consequence all of the other aspects and manifestations of cardiovascular disease, heart, and stroke. So, if you want to know whether you are at risk for death by cardiovascular disease, you should have the laboratory determine the level of lipoprotein A in your blood. Unfortunately, you probably know what your LDL is. The laboratories all report the LDL, the low-density lipoprotein. They report that HDL, if you have a lot of lipoprotein A, you have a lot of HDL, which is the good lipoprotein that takes cholesterol away from the arteries. That's another way in which vitamin C works in a beneficial manner. But I just read recently an article on lipoprotein A saying that some laboratories will determine it, and they charge about $30 extra for the determination. I don't know what my lipoprotein A level is. I haven't got around to having it determined. But it's probably low because my heart is in excellent shape now. And I've been telling Dr. Rath, a cardiologist, why don't you take a sample of my blood and send it off to one of these laboratories and see? I'm just curious. Well, if you're at high risk for lipoprotein A, then what can you do? The paper that we have just published says that the primary cause of cardiovascular disease, death by heart attacks and strokes and so on, is a deficiency in vitamin C. And that everybody, almost everybody in the world is deficient in vitamin C, taking only the small amount, 60 milligrams or less, instead of the several grams that I recommend. So everybody is at risk. And here we have logical argument involved. You know, Brown and Goldstein in Dallas got the Nobel Prize for their discoveries about LDL. They discovered the LDL receptor. It was about 10 years ago that they got the Nobel Prize. 1984, 8 years ago. In their articles, they say the primary cause of cardiovascular disease is a lesion in the wall of the artery. And that is followed by a whole cascade of consequences. The body tries to heal the lesion in various ways, and sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. But the primary cause is lesions in the walls of the artery. So, I'm a sort of specialist on vitamin C. I said, Dr. Rath, why do the arteries develop lesions in human beings, but not in other animals? It doesn't happen, cardiovascular disease, in the animals that make their own vitamin C. They make it, by the way, proportional to body weight. An animal the size of the man makes 10 or 12 grams of vitamin C per day. Different animals, somewhat different amounts, but about 12 grams, 12,000 milligrams, 200 times the RDA for human beings. So, other animals don't develop cardiovascular disease. Humans do, because of these lesions. And why do they form the lesions? Because they don't have enough vitamin C in their blood. Therefore, we said in our article, a deficiency in vitamin C is the primary cause of cardiovascular disease. So, in our paper, we say to protect yourself against heart disease, take vitamin C in the right amount. Also, why is it that the lipoprotein, high vitamin C intake decreases the lipoprotein A, which is, of course, reasonable if lipoprotein A was developed as a surrogate for deficiency of for the vitamin C. Then if you take plenty of vitamin C, you don't spend so much time and material and effort to synthesize a lot of lipoprotein A. So take vitamin C as a prophylactic agent and a therapeutic agent. Can you do something else? Well, if you take a chromatographic column, a column which contains some little sand grains or something like that, and pour blood plasma over it, it will run on through. If you attach to the sand grains an amino acid, one of the essential amino acids for human beings, lysine, L-lysine. If you attach lysine to these particles and pour the plasma, human plasma over it, the lipoprotein A sticks. The other lipoproteins go on through. And so you can separate the lipoprotein A from the other lipoproteins by using these lysyl groups, by having them stuck onto the column, and that makes the lipoprotein A stick. Moreover, if you just dissolve some lysine in water and pour it over the column, it elutes the lipoprotein A. It dissolves the lipoprotein A away from the lysyl groups that are attached to the sand grains in the column. Or if you take your plasma and add some lysine, the essential amino acid lysine, to it, and pour it over the column, the lipoprotein A doesn't stick to the lysyl groups on the column. And there's other evidence too that it is lysyl groups on the walls of the artery that grab hold of the lipoprotein A particles as they come through and cause them to stick and cause the atherosclerotic plaques. So we say you can prevent atherosclerosis and all kinds of heart disease if you take some lysine. Well, lysine is an essential amino acid. W.C. Rose, Professor W.C. Rose in Illinois, University of Illinois in 1935, studied healthy male students by giving them foods not containing any lysine. They got sick. They no longer were in nitrogen balance. He decided that about 1 gram a day was needed. If you eat meat, you get lysine. The proteins in meat contain lysine, so that you get some lysine. You may get 1 gram if you eat some meat, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 grams, depending on how much meat you eat. Vegetarians sometimes suffer from deficiency in lysine. If they're careful to eat some soybeans, soybeans have a moderate amount of lysine, then they perhaps don't suffer from deficiency in lysine. But the lysine that you get in your food is for people with high lipoprotein A in their blood, not enough to keep the plaques from forming. I'm not a physician. I'm not allowed to treat patients. Well, that's perhaps not quite right. I'm not sure just what the law says. Lots of people come in to see me at Palo Alto. I give them advice, tell them what I think they ought to do. I don't charge them anything. And maybe they're not, I don't keep a record even. Maybe they're not my patients because I don't charge them anything. No. I was back 15 months ago in Washington, D.C., attending my 59th meeting. Well, I didn't go to all of them, of the National Academy of Sciences that I joined, was elected in 1933. Well, some affair in the evening, a man came up to me, a member of the Academy, and said, Dr. Pauling, I have heart disease. I'm taking 6 grams of vitamin C per day on your something you said. So I'm taking 6 grams of vitamin C a day. My father and my brother both died young from cardiovascular disease. I am a biochemist. I was working for the National Institutes of Health, and they retired me a good number of years ago for disability. I've had 3 bypass operations. My last triple bypass, I don't have any saphenous veins left, so I can't have more bypass operations. I like to walk or exercise, but I can't walk unless I take a nitroglycerin tablet when I stop. And my heart starts paining and angina pectoris. I have taken another nitroglycerin tablet to control the angina. Is there something else I could do? So I call this fellow my first heart patient. I thought, well, what do I know? What has Dr. Rath taught me? I know that lysyl groups are what cause lipoprotein A to stick to the arterial wall, and that lysine can prevent this and can even elute the particles. After they're stuck, the plaque can be made to go away, at least in guinea pigs. And there's even little evidence for humans going back a long way. Evidence that was just ignored. So I said, well, take some lysine. Well, of course, he knows all about lysine, being a biochemist, or at least knows something about lysine. Biochemists and nutritionists are something like medical people in not knowing much about vitamins, but he knew about lysine, an amino acid, an essential amino acid. So he said, how much? I said, well, try taking 5 grams a day. This was just a guess. We still don't know how much lysine people with cardiovascular disease don't take. I said, try taking 5 grams a day. You can start with 1 gram and then 2 grams and then up to 5 grams. And you don't need a prescription. You don't need to tell your doctor you're doing this. He perhaps doesn't know you're taking the 6 grams of vitamin C a day because patients are usually reticent about matters like this when they talk to their doctor. So 5 grams a day. 2 months later, I had a call from him and then a letter. And in the material given to you, I think there's an account of this case with my name attached. The patient helped me to write it, but said he didn't want to be identified. Is it in the...
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So he called and said, it's almost miraculous. A month after he had got to 5 grams a day, he could walk 2 miles without taking any medication. A couple of months later, he called me and then wrote to me saying, I was feeling so well that I cut a big tree down in our yard and I was cutting it up into wood, and I had chest pains and from exerting myself too much. So he said, I went up to 6 grams a day, and now I'm continuing to cut the tree up for wood. And I've begun painting the house, too. So, well, that's one patient. By the way, he's one of the leading biochemists in the country. One of the few who have received the National Medal of Science. About 10 scientists per year received this medal during the last 20 years. Perhaps that would be a couple of hundred altogether. Perhaps 10 or 12 of them are biochemists, and he's one of them. So he's become an enthusiast about vitamin C and lysine. And he said several of his friends he has taking lysine as well as vitamin C. And some of my friends, too, have told me that they have problems with the heart and they're taking. And we don't have information about them and don't have really much information. But what is it that I say to people who ask me? I say, well, an adult, if you don't know whether you're susceptible to heart attack or not, you ought to be taking several grams of vitamin C a day, but perhaps you don't need to take lysine. Doesn't cost much, a few cents per tablet, and you can buy it at Bronson Pharmaceuticals and Lacania and other perhaps health food stores. You may have to check the price to be sure that you're not being ripped off, but you don't need to tell your doctor, or you don't need to have a prescription. Now, if you are at some risk, if you have a history of death by heart disease and stroke in your family, surely you ought to be taking good amounts of vitamin C, 6 grams a day perhaps, the way this patient of mine in Washington or Virginia does, or more, and let's say 2 grams of lysine per day. If you feel that or if you know that your lipoprotein A is greater than 20 milligrams per deciliter, these are the people who die of heart disease and stroke. Then you perhaps ought to be doing the way this patient does, taking 5 or 6 grams of lysine a day. Or if you have a history of heart trouble, then you perhaps ought to be taking that amount. Well, why don't we know more? In our institute in Palo Alto, we don't have any patients, no doctor with us who's licensed to practice in California. We're not able to carry out clinical work. For a couple of years, I've been trying to get cardiologists to do some clinical studies. Just like this one of my patients, just if you have a patient having some trouble, why not try giving him or her a high dose of vitamin C and lysine too. No success. I just can't budge them. They have such a bias against vitamins and against amino acids and they're so hipped about LDL, high cholesterol, saying you must stop eating eggs. This is nonsense. You manufacture 4,000 milligrams of cholesterol in the liver every day. You have to, because all cells in the body depend on cholesterol for good health. It's distributed through the bloodstream to the cells because they need it. Now, if you didn't have some way of getting rid of cholesterol, pretty soon getting 4 grams a day from the liver, you'd be nothing but cholesterol. So 4 grams a day, 4,000 milligrams needs to be destroyed. If you eat eggs, you get 200 milligrams per egg into the body. And the liver cuts back a little, a feedback effect. It doesn't manufacture quite so much. Eggs are a good food. Stopping eating eggs or eating fat meat is not the way to lower cholesterol. High vitamin C lowers it by hydroxylating the cholesterol to bile acids, and the bile acids are then excreted in the bile into the intestinal contents and are got rid of. Some of the bile acids are brought back into the bloodstream in the lower bowels and reconverted to cholesterol. If you are constipated, a larger amount is reconverted, and so your cholesterol level goes up. It's a good idea to take enough vitamin C to act as a laxative and get rid of this stuff fast. That resin that I mentioned, cholestyramine, costs $2,000 per patient per year and isn't very effective. They take 24 grams. I don't know that anybody's doing it anymore. They had a big trial with 2,000 people cost $20 million and found that cholestyramine wasn't very effective. That was just a way of combining with the bile acids in the gut so that they weren't reintroduced in the bloodstream and reconverted to cholesterol. Pretty expensive and ineffective way, in fact. So that's the way in which vitamin C helps to lower cholesterol by increasing the rate of conversion to bile acids. The liver manufactures it at a certain rate, and if you bleed it off as bile acids faster, the steady state concentration in the blood goes down. Dr. Rath and I say that the most important risk factor for cardiovascular disease is a deficiency in vitamin C. The next most important is the level of lipoprotein A in the blood. And third, how far down, we don't know, the cholesterol level. Cholesterol isn't the most important. Now, why don't we know more? I couldn't budge these cardiologists. Still can't. At Stanford Medical School and the Oregon Health Center in Portland, which I thought I'd like to have them involved in the discovery because I was born in Portland in 1901. Can't budge them. So Dr. Rath and I say, how can we get some clinical work done? We need money. We set up the Linus Pauling Heart Foundation. It's not going to carry out any experiments, have its own laboratory. We have the Linus Pauling Institute there in Palo Alto. The Health Foundation might give the Institute a little money to do some more experimental work. But the main thing is get some money, and we can use that money to get the physicians, the cardiologists, to carry out some studies on, my observation is that they can't resist the temptation, if the money is involved, of doing some work. So we're hoping to raise a good amount of money. It takes quite a lot, too, to do medical work of this sort. Dr. Rath went to Moscow and talked with Dr. Chasov, the famous cardiologist there, head of the great cardiological laboratory. And Dr. Chasov has agreed to do some experimental work. Well, there's someone else, Kansas, is that right?
Kansas City University.
They're willing, they're interested in doing some work too. So, you can understand why I feel so excited. I think that the people who follow these recommendations will be protected against death with cardiovascular disease. If we can get the whole idea accepted so that everybody is taking a good amount of vitamin C, and many people are taking lysine in addition. By the way, we know a couple of other substances that are even more effective than lysine. They are drugs that are approved by the FDA. You have to have a doctor's prescription. They are approved for treating a different kind of disease, but they will be effective in case of patients. It may well be that patients with very serious heart disease ought to be taking these drugs instead of the lysine. Well, much to my surprise, around 25 years ago to 20 years ago, 22, I became pretty interested in the vitamins. I thought they weren't very interesting substances up to that time. The scientific work I do, I find really very interesting because of the problems it proposes, the puzzles that need to be solved. Now here, with cardiovascular disease, there have been some interesting puzzles that came along. Just what are the mechanisms? Can you apply your powers of logical thinking, to draw conclusions. So it's been a pretty interesting life for me the last couple of years, and I think for my associate, Dr. Rath. And of course, it was his discovery, published about 3 or 4 years ago in a couple of papers, that it is not LDL itself, but rather lipoprotein A that is laid down in atherosclerotic plaques that has led to all of this development. I spent the last 4 days in Texas, invited by the Texas Heart Institute, Dr. Denton Cooley, whom I hadn't met before. Dr. Coop, the former Surgeon General, was there too. I was able to talk with him a little, and it was a great affair there. I gave a couple of lectures and got an astonishingly good response from all of the cardiologists, the doctors who came to these lectures. And that's helped me to be optimistic about the future, too. Well, I'll stop now. Perhaps Dr. Rath is going to make a presentation, or I'll answer questions. What do you have in mind, Dr.
I think it would be good if there are some direct questions to the talk that we just permit them.
I'd like to ask a question. I actually have several questions. My first is,
Come up closer and
I'm sorry?
my hearing.
Oh, okay.
You know, I have a hearing aid, but
Actually, I'm slightly hearing impaired.
my memory is failing me, I guess. I never remember I've never used the hearing aid. Come up a little closer.
How do
Go closer.
Go closer.
What are the questions?
My first question is, how do you explain the difference in the rate of heart disease in different countries, and especially the lower rate in areas where people have specific diets, for instance, eating large amounts of fish? That has been connected to lower rates of heart disease, but that doesn't seem to have any link to this vitamin C question.
Well, the question is, how do I explain the fact that there's a different rate of death from heart disease in different countries? Of course, in some countries, people die pretty young, and it's older people who tend to die from heart disease, but it may well be that the age-standardized mortality rate is different in different countries, and in particular, in countries where they eat a lot of fish, the rate of heart disease is low. Well, it seems to me that in Finland, heart disease, they perhaps eat a lot of fish, but the death rate from heart disease is high. But about fish, I said that meat provides the amino acid lysine. Fish also is rich in lysine. So I don't know whether this is an answer to the question. There's a possibility that the people who eat a lot of fish get a lot of lysine, and that inhibits the deposition of the plaques.
I'm R.J. Hampton, and I'd like to ask a question that probably you can give an answer to. Since your given area of expertise is chemical equations and compounds, my concern about vitamin C that hasn't been addressed today, and that is the source of the vitamin C that we will be taking in. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to address synthetic coal tar vitamins versus natural, and exactly where we would get this source of vitamin C from. And my second part of that question is the equivalent in food equivalents. Could you give us some, like the orange juice that we're drinking today? How much, in terms of your recommended dose, would be taken in naturally as opposed to...
Okay, I could get my 18 grams a day by drinking 338 ounce glasses of orange juice a day. It contains 90 milligrams in 8 ounce glass. That's answered the first question. Very hard to get. You can get 600 no, it's hard to get more than 200 or 300 milligrams a day from food. the 600 milligrams that I mentioned with several thousand people in that 11,000 people in that study, UCLA study, was obtained by taking vitamin tablets.
And that was made
tablets. Now as to the kind of vitamin C, all vitamin C is the same. It's the ascorbate ion, the L-ascorbate ion, and it's all the same. And essentially all of it comes from the same source. So far as I'm aware, there's no vitamin tablet or vitamin C tablet on the market today where the vitamin, there may be, I'm not sure about that, but
I'm concerned about coal tar vitamins.
Often on a bottle it says rosehip vitamin C, and then it says in the small print, contains rosehip powder and natural L-ascorbic acid vitamin C. L-ascorbic acid is the natural enantiomer of ascorbic acid. It's the left-handed molecule. We have also the right-handed molecule that you can buy up to $1 a gram, or perhaps 50 or 100 times the cost of vitamin C for doing work in the laboratory. It doesn't protect you against scurvy, very low protective power. So when they say natural vitamin C or natural ascorbic acid, they mean that's what Hoffmann-La Roche manufactures in its big vitamin C factories, and it's the same as is present in all the other vitamin C tablets. So they're trying to rip you off by suggesting that their vitamin C tablets are different from the other vitamin C tablets.
Thank you.
Hi, it's me again.
Do you know if vitamin C is good for reducing the occlusions in the arteries? Have you been able to test that?
Reducing the occlusion.
Reducing the amount of buildup and
yes.
flat.
Okay. The only evidence, yes. There was a paper published years ago. How many? 40 years ago?
1954.
By a Canadian investigator who said that giving a few grams of vitamin C a day to patients with atherosclerotic plaques was shown by angiographic methods to lead to a reduction in half of them, perhaps a reduction in the size of the plaque. And we have similar results on the hypoascorbemic guinea pig. We published a paper on an animal model for atherosclerosis. If you put a guinea pig in the laboratory, guinea pigs, ordinarily guinea pigs get a lot of vitamin C, 50 times what humans would get on a weight basis. If you give them the same amount as RDA for humans, in 3 weeks or a month, they start developing atherosclerotic plaques. We have some preliminary information that putting them back on the high-dose vitamin C causes the plaques to start to disappear. Any other questions?
I have another question. In relation to alcohol and vitamin C, could you, in terms of it, in relation to the use of alcohol and following your prescription of 6 grams of milligrams of, or whatever, grams of ascorbic acid per day, a person who is ingesting alcohol or uses alcohol that day, how much of that vitamin C would be washed out of the body or be of no use to them? In other words, that relationship in terms.
Question is about, does alcohol wash vitamin C out of the body?
Well,
I think the answer is no, that it doesn't. You had a question?
Yes, I did. Since the lipoprotein A is created by attaching to protein, does that account for the danger of high-protein diets? Does that explain why those are so dangerous?
Since lipoprotein A is made from LDL by hooking a particular protein, apoprotein A, onto it, wouldn't it be dangerous to increase your protein intake to go on a high-protein diet? Well, I forget how much apoprotein A people manufacture per day. Centrifuge, 10, 15 milligrams of fraction, small fraction of a gram. You require perhaps 40 or 50 or 60 grams of protein a day. Well, I sort of advocate a low protein diet, but not for that reason. I don't think that's a factor. We're engaged in trying to find out what factors are involved in the lipoprotein A level, but I don't have anything special to say about it now. Any other questions? You know, I know a tremendous amount about this. I can go on talking for 10 hours and not repeating myself very often. Well, I'll finish by saying, I'll say, I think that this discovery that Dr. Rath made was really the significant one and one of the most important discoveries made. That it isn't LDL, but lipoprotein A that's laid down. And then that I think that this whole complex of arguments, reasoning, and the conclusions that we reach that deficiency in vitamin C is responsible for cardiovascular disease, primarily responsible, and that lysine can help prevent that is extremely important. Yes?
Just quickly, if I may, can you give us a bit of a sense of the balance between lysine and vitamin C in this battle for cardiovascular health? In other words, weighing lysine's advantages or its aspects versus increased C, do they need to go in conjunction with one?
The question is, can I balance vitamin C against lysine? I don't think so. They do different things. But my answer would be everybody needs to take good big slugs of vitamin C every day. And perhaps not everybody needs to take extra lysine. They get lysine in their food, but many people, those at risk for cardiovascular disease, need to do it. And going to still higher vitamin C does not take the place of taking some lysine.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pauling. Maybe we give you some little rest and some additional questions and maybe raise. Just in addition to the question that has been brought up.
Well, I was worried about that.
Oh, damn it.
With respect to the question that had been brought up in Eskimos and people who have a diet rich in fish, and the question on reduced heart disease. The first observations date back to the Eskimo studies. They eat raw fish, full in fat, and it's another example of a misled research community. The research community has focused on the fatty acids, omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, and have assigned the reduced mortality cardiovascular disease in this population to an increased amount of omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids. What they haven't checked up is that Eskimos eat raw fish mainly. And raw fish, these are vitamin bombs from the plankton in the sea. So it would be extremely important to do a study measuring the vitamin C content in the diet of Eskimos and comparing to the other results. But let me come back to the issue that is in the program, the goals of the Linus Pauling Heart Foundation. The Linus Pauling Heart Foundation carries the name of one of the great scientists of this century. It is the mission of the foundation to contribute to a significant improvement, to a significant increase of human health with vitamins and other essential nutrients in the area of heart disease and related diseases. It is an honor for any organization to carry the name of Dr. Linus Pauling. Like few others, Linus Pauling has contributed to the progress of science and medicine in this century. He identified the structure of dozens of anorganic and organic molecules. He was the first to describe the structure of proteins. He was the first to describe DNA, the genetic material, as a helical structure. He was the first to discover a genetic disease, sickle cell anemia. His greatest achievement, however, in medicine was his advocacy for vitamin C in the prevention and treatment of human diseases. Linus Pauling was far ahead of his time, and we are slowly catching up on him. Already 20 years ago, he had understood that it can be no coincidence that the most common human diseases, like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and others, just do not occur in animals that produce vitamin C in their body. In human beings unable to manufacture vitamin C and frequently having a low dietary intake of this vitamin, these diseases virtually kill millions of people every year. With this advocacy of vitamins, Linus Pauling has virtually saved millions of lives already. The publication of his first book on vitamin C in 1970 increased vitamin C consumption in the United States by 300% over the next 2 decades. At the same time, and exactly in parallel, the incidence of heart disease, stroke, and related forms of cardiovascular diseases decreased significantly, and the United States became the only industrialized country where the incidence of heart disease could be reversed. On the basis of our recent discoveries, these 2 developments, the increased consumption of vitamin C in the United States and the decrease of mortality for heart disease, are no longer coincidental. The credit for this development largely goes to one man, Linus Pauling. There is nobody in the world whose name deserves more to be associated with the successful fight against heart disease than Linus Pauling. There is nobody to whom later generations will give more credit for having contributed to this turning point in medicine than to him. The goals of the Linus Pauling Heart Foundation are clearly defined. Much more research and many more clinical studies are immediately needed that document the important role of vitamin C. Vitamin C and other essential nutrients, and in their preventive role of heart disease and related forms of cardiovascular disease. With millions of lives at stake, these studies have to be started immediately. The Linus Pauling Heart Foundation will raise funds for this important international effort. We will accept donations, we will organize professional memberships as well as supporting memberships. Everybody is invited to support this important effort. The Linus Pauling Heart Foundation will have local chapters to encourage research at many centers as well as clinical studies at many hospitals. The Linus Pauling Heart Foundation will have international chapters, and I just have learned that a chapter in Canada is in progress to be organized. The Linus Pauling Heart Foundation is no competitor to the American Heart Association or other professional organizations in the area of cardiovascular disease. The foundation complements these professional organizations with a specific focus on nutritional supplements. As Dr. Pauling already pointed out, the first reaction to the foundation from the public is overwhelming. Moreover, the support among representatives of the medical community is also encouraging and may signalize a turning point towards the perception of vitamins as an integral part of medical treatment. Let me conclude with a few personal remarks. As Dr. Pauling mentioned, both of us met 10 years ago. What he actually said at that time was, Matthias, if you want to be a good doctor, you have to understand biochemistry and you have to do research. That's what I did. After discovering the role of lipoprotein A, which is about a 10-fold greater risk factor than low-density lipoprotein or LDL, after having discovered that and having found that it's primarily present in humans who have ceased to produce their own vitamin C, I discussed these discoveries with Dr. Pauling. That's about 2.5 years ago. Dr. Pauling said, Matthias, this is not a single observation, this is a principle of nature, and he encouraged me to join him. Once again, Linus Pauling had proven his scientific greatness in immediately seeing the scope of this discovery. Everything else is history. 2 years later, we have largely solved the puzzle of human heart disease. We have now the historic opportunity to largely get rid of this disease, the number one cause of death in many countries. To get rid of this disease, just as mankind got rid of smallpox and many other plagues from earlier centuries. This may sound too good to be true, but don't forget, heart disease just does not occur in those animals producing their own vitamin C in the body. Realizing our responsibility, Dr. Pauling and I have discussed and issued a call for an international effort to abolish heart disease. And you can get copies at the end, at the exit. This call ends with the following sentences. With millions of lives at stake each year, no time should be lost. We call upon our colleagues in science and medicine to join in a vigorous international effort on the levels of both basic research and clinical studies to investigate the value of vitamin C and other nutrients in controlling heart disease. We call upon the national and international health authorities and other health institutions to support this effort with political and financial measures. We call upon every human being to encourage local medical institutions and physicians to take an active part in this process. The goal of eliminating heart disease as the major cause of death and disability is now in sight. With this press conference, we have made the first steps, but much more lies ahead to be accomplished. We count on you from the media to continue to support the important work of the Linus Pauling Heart Foundation. Thank you.
Have you had any feedback from the American Heart Association about this show?
Dr. Pauling has written a letter to the president of the American Heart Foundation, American Heart Association, Virtue Brown from Emory University. I think we haven't had a response yet. So far, we sent the invitations for this press conference to all the professional media, including the American Heart Association's journal, and we included the poster, and we hope that slowly we will move in this direction, even though there is no official enthusiastic reaction, which would perhaps be a little bit too much to be expected at that point.
Why do you suspect the, for lack of a better word, the medical establishment has not been quick to embrace this information?
Well, maybe this question can be answered best by Dr. Pauling himself. He has fought a battle on vitamin C for 20 years. And there are several reasons why in my opinion, there is a reluctance in the medical community towards vitamins and vitamin C. One is that research and clinical studies are basically sponsored by two sources. One are governmental and the other one are pharmaceutical companies. Vitamins are not patentable. There's no interest whatsoever in getting research results and clinical studies conducted with vitamins. That's a major obstacle. Any other drug has advantages in being commercially interesting. The other factor is the personal involvement of scientists and medical people in this dogmas they have created over have been created over the decades. And it is hard for anybody to acknowledge that major parts of his life, his medical career, may have been built on wrong assumptions or incomplete assumptions. So, on the other hand, it is nothing new. All great scientists have faced a similar problem like Dr. Pauling did. Just remember, 300 years ago, Galileo was banished for saying the world is round. Now here we have a different situation. Galileo he wasn't alive when he was vindicated. But with Dr. Pauling, it may well be that he's still alive while he will be widely received in the medical community and around the world for his advocacy on vitamin C.
I have another question, and that's about the correlation that you made between the reduction in heart disease and the increase in sales of vitamin C. During this period of time, though, there have been a number of other changes. For instance, an exercise boom. Everybody was jogging there for, 15 years, and a lot of people still are. There were major changes in our dietary consciousness about fat intake. So there are a lot of other factors. How can you make a direct correlation between the vitamin C, the increase in vitamin C intake per se, and the reduction in heart disease?
We have always carefully handled that figure that you see on this graph, and the answer is, there are several answers to that. One is, I'm coming from Europe, from Germany, industrialized country, where similar developments took place with respect to awareness on exercising, awareness on high fat, awareness on smoking, awareness on many other factors that are risk factors on heart disease. The only significant difference is that the average in intake of vitamins, and particularly vitamin C, is essentially absent to supplement vitamins in the diet all over Europe. The remarkable fact is that the European countries still have an increase in their heart disease rate, in the incidence of heart disease. So that's one argument. The other argument comes from what Dr. Pauling explained before, that our understanding now on the pathomechanisms, on what really goes on in the arteries, our experimental data, which we did in the animal studies, and lately the epidemiological studies that have been published from Los Angeles, where it was shown that vitamin C is directly associated with the decrease in the incidence of heart disease. All this comes together at this point in time. And there's no reason for us anymore to hide important graphics that have been published 10 years ago that exactly show that.
I assume I can ask you a biochemistry question since you took Dr. Pauling's advice, right?
Well, Dr. Pauling, you want to come to the microphone?
Well, I want to just ask because at Duke University and University of Wisconsin, I believe there's a lot of study using vitamin C in creams to essentially mop up the free radicals, to support so the collagen doesn't break down. And this is sounding very similar to what you're saying goes on in the arteries, but I don't know if it is or not. I mean, is there a correlation there? Or basically the same action happening?
Well, the question is about free radicals and their relationship to vitamin C and to cardiovascular disease. There are several points that I didn't mention, parts of our argument. One is that peroxidation of the cholesterol in the material laid down in the arteries is an important factor in production of cardiovascular disease. And there are a number of antioxidants that will work to destroy. It's thought that the free radicals are involved in this peroxidation, and that there are substances, antioxidants, that prevent it and destroy the free radicals, prevent the peroxidation. Bruce Ames, over in Berkeley, leading biochemist, and two of his associates published a paper a couple of years ago saying that they have evidence, which they presented, that the most important antioxidant is the vitamin C. And the beta-carotene, there are others, and of course vitamin E is the fat-soluble antioxidant. So there is evidence, good evidence, that vitamin C works to destroy free radicals and prevent damage to the lipids by peroxidation. I might comment on an earlier point. Emil Ginter in Czechoslovakia published a paper in the United States a few years ago, pointing out that there's a correlation between a decrease in death rate from cardiovascular disease in the United States and the large increase in the sales of vitamin C. Well, there's no doubt about the correlation. The statistics, the evidence is there. The question you might ask is there a causal relationship? Well, Emil Ginter didn't go so far as to say that it's the increased intake of vitamin C that has caused the decrease in death rate. He said, perhaps that's true. And of course, we have additional evidence about just how increased intake of vitamin C, what the mechanism is whereby it would lower the death rate. So now there's somewhat greater justification for saying there's a causal relationship here, not just a correlation.
Well, also with the increase, or the decrease of heart disease, I wonder, because I've heard that there's also an increase in childhood leukemia and cancer rates and other kinds of diseases, and I look towards the intake of, let's say, even coal tar vitamin C versus natural sources of vitamin C.
I didn't hear. What?
If there's a microphone arriving on the floor here.
My question is that there's with an increase or a decrease of heart disease, but there's also been an increase of cancer rates and childhood leukemia rates. And I'm wondering if, in terms of even the coal tar vitamin C that we take versus natural sources of vitamin C, or the dairy industry or the chemicals that's going into our beef industry, a lot of that has to do with the cancer rates. So I guess my question is your recommendation of vitamins that are made from petroleum sources, coal tar vitamin C's.
One was the question on heart disease in relation to cancer. Why does vitamin C deficiency favor both heart disease and cancer? Or why is vitamin C good to prevent both diseases? And the second question was, what's your recommendation on petroleum-based vitamin C?
Well, first, I'll answer the second question. What's my position on petroleum-based vitamin C? I don't know any petroleum-based vitamin C. Practically all the vitamin C that's available on the market is made from glucose, actually from corn syrup, a solution of glucose made from corn. And I'm trying to think about a connection with petroleum, but I don't see much.
Dr. Pauling,
The other
are you saying that that vitamins, that the coal tar industry, get to the microphone, because I have an axe to grind here, because I'm here because I care about you, and I care about the people in terms of where they get their vitamin C from. So because you haven't heard of it, it may be possible that you've been focusing on one thing so long that perhaps someone has something to share with you. And this may not be that time, but I am going to say that the coal tar industry does derive vitamins. How do we protect ourselves from good sources of vitamin C as opposed to discreditable sources of vitamin C? The other thing I'm going to say in terms of nutrition, that I think that it's kind of illogical from where I come to say that anything in terms of this crazy society that we live in, and then the fact that we regulate our poisons, that there are so many things that are breaking us down. I believe that alcohol, nicotine, all these things, the smoking industry and all these things, if we are not taking and yielding and giving up those things, if we then take the vitamin C, it may work. I'm sorry to hear that at 91 you're still so focused on the point that you can't see the periphery, that you're asking human beings to be test tubes, and yes, I'm accepting that, and I'm accepting the fact that vitamin C is good for me. But each time you don't speak upon those things that knock vitamin C out of the body. Each time you don't speak about nicotine. Each time you don't speak about alcohol and the effects it has on the body and the body's ability to absorb and utilize these vitamins. I find your revelation and your discovery anemic for a society that must understand quickly the sense of urgency of a chemical equilibrium and balance in the body. I too am a chemist major. I too have studied everything that you've written, down to schizophrenia as it relates to coal tar products, and I am sorry to hear that you have never heard that there is that the coal tar industry can make vitamin C. And until I understand that the Surgeon General has said coal tar vitamins are okay for us and that they don't cause cancer, I find that your 91 years are going to go down the toilet because someone else is going to upset your research and get to the truth of the matter so that we can have health rather than wealth for the pharmaceutical industry as people run to try and save their lives. So please give a comprehensive press conference and address yourselves to the realities of the people who are living out here, breathing the pollution, breathing the discoveries of Madame Curie and Millikan and cosmic rays and everything that you did before you had a consciousness. I tried to stay nice, but I find that yes, because your revelations have come so late in life that I believe that the baton, it's too late. And this man here, as he discresses the smoking industry, children in the Ronald McDonald houses, arteries are closing up before they're even 4 years old. The effects of prenatal, the effects of everything. I'm not angry, I'm passionate that you accept all that we're talking about and that scientists stop being so damn closed-minded when you're talking to the common people. You have a tendency to talk over our heads when vitally you have a revelation. Jesus Christ didn't have to talk about lipo this and lipo that in order to say, do as I say, because I follow your advice, and I'm 40 years old now. I'm 40 years old and I don't look a day over 25. And I know what I'm doing because I follow you. But now you tell me that alcohol and vitamin C it doesn't have any effect on the body, and I say that is illogical reasoning, Dr. Pauling. Illogical reasoning. Yes, he did. It's on my tape. He said it doesn't wash out of the body.
The other part of the earlier question about cancer, I think I've already answered in that vitamin C in higher doses potentiates the body's natural immune mechanisms, and they help protect against all sorts of diseases. The other vitamins and minerals also help. And the most recent evidence, Dr. Hopper and I published a paper on 134 cancer patients that were registered with him, and the survival time from the time of registration with him as advanced cancer patients who were having psychiatric problems was 6 months for the ones who didn't follow his vitamin regimen, and 16 times that for the ones who did follow the vitamin mineral regimen. So I'm pretty sure that most of the effect is potentiating the body's immune systems. But with heart disease, which is a far simpler disease because it's just one organ, the heart, and not the various organs in the body and various tissues, and also has a simple function of pumping blood. Heart disease is a simpler disease. We understand much better what's going on with heart disease, and vitamin C seems to have some specific functions with respect to heart disease. I think I heard this last, not exactly questioner, say something about pollutants, chemicals in the environment, and in a paper that Dr. Cameron and Dr. Leibowitz and I published, we listed 100 of these substances, chemical substances that are pollutants and so on, that are eliminated from the human body by hydroxylation or glycosylation by vitamin C in the liver. That's one of the functions of vitamin C, to help get rid of toxic materials. Well, of course, I believe that we should be careful about polluting the environment, but vitamin C is such a versatile substance in its various activities. It also helps protect us against pollution. I mentioned I could go on for 10 hours bringing up additional facts, such as this one about the importance of vitamin C in destroying toxic substances in the body by hydroxylation or glycosylation, and then they are eliminated.